I'm giving you the Wayne's World.
Against the machine and mountain biking. You can do something with those two things.
I really wanted. I'm so excited about the idea that we can really truly pick up where we left off. What was our last live show? Like March? Did we do any in April?
Enough that I have stage fright, Dan.
You should, because I'm gonna leave this thing hot until 6 in the afternoon. So be careful. You're just gonna give me the don't give me the death glare again. I earned it one time.
Yeah, you left the show on a little too long, and then we had conversations that were not meant to be on air. Hey, everybody.
No, they were meant to be. I know what you're talking about. Those were for everybody. It was a peek behind the curtain.
It was good intel. I'll give you that.
We got all sorts of intel these days. Hey, everybody. Still Dan, and he's still Aaron. It's been a while. It's good for you guys to see me in my love den once more.
Clearly, the upgrade budget didn't hit your piece over there. We're still in the love den.
You're still in the love den, but the bed is made, Tiberius. So the upgrade is there.
I haven't heard from Tiberius in a while. What's up with Tiberius?
I'm not sure, actually. I haven't either. I just assume that he's sort of lurking, waiting in the wings, ready to talk to us. Maybe today's the day. So I don't even know what to welcome you guys to. This is Draft Prep Q&A at Hoopball or Hoopball, depending on how the rest of this program goes. I'm Dan Vespers. He is Aaron Bruski, the man that you're more than likely here to see. I'm hopefully the man you're here to listen for like the first 30 seconds, and then I basically step aside. And I mean, this is just an opportunity for those of you out there that have questions about draft prep, about getting ready for the fantasy NBA season, to lay them on us, and we will get to them as we see fit, and assuming that it doesn't force you, I guess, to reveal anything monumental from the Brewski 150, right?
Yeah, we should talk. We should have talked about that off air. You're not allowed to reveal certain things, Dan.
Yeah, so
it's too early. It's too early.
So, I've been saying this on Fantasy NBA Today, because I know I've seen tweets come through at you at Hoopball Tweets and so forth asking about the B150. We're starting to get a little bit closer, largely because I believe, and feel free to fill in some of the blank areas on this one. We're getting closer because the market is starting to settle a little bit. You're starting to see other websites reveal their numbers. Yahoo and ESPN have put out their numbers. So once things kind of level off a little bit, then the B150 can come out, and we can actually trace the movement of players' ADPs after your information hits the market. And that's kind of like, I mean, that's the point of it, right? Like, you want the value, but you also want to be able to see where things move when certain information breaks.
It's a challenge. I mean, it was a challenge when I was at RotoWorld, and the reach of RotoWorld is so great. You're kind of balancing. I would get emails from people complaining nicely, I'll add, if they're watching. They were very respectful emails, saying, you're releasing these lists, and now they're going into places like Yahoo, and they're just kind of all over the place, and it's almost like everybody's competing against the list. And so yeah, I've tried through the years, and the last 3 to 5 years at RotoWorld was basically like some sort of staged release of this stuff. So your diehards can kind of get a read on the situation. They can also, as well as everybody else, get the lists in those different stages and be able to not just dump this on the public so everybody's ADP goes up to where we have them ranked. And because that, then you kill all the value off. And that was actually, there's people I would message like in the industry, and they're going nuts on a player I like. And it's like, man, too early. I mean, you're going to just kill their ADP. And what kind of service are we doing for our owners if we do that? So especially right now, we continue to grow at a kind of semi-exponential rate. So we're good this year. Next year, we might be good too, to not just completely wipe out the ADPs that are out there. But pretty soon we're going to have to get real creative to keep this stuff, in a good place for owners. Because face it, if I got a guy that's ranked, I'm going to tell you guys, if finishing in the top 50, and he's currently going in the top 100 to 150, or maybe he's not even getting drafted. If we blast this stuff out in early September, you don't get the profit. So we just take a little bit of a different approach than other sites. We try to be as creative as possible, so you both get the information, but also can do something with it when you do get the information. So deadlines, though, are right around the corner. The Brewski 150 early release is September 20. I've had a few folks reach out to me and ask me if we could go a little bit sooner on that because they've got drafts prior to that, and that's tough. I'm working on it. We're not sleeping. I know. I don't get it. I mean, to each their own, but I'd rather wait until the very end.
Yeah, someone could get hurt badly during the preseason. I mean, we basically got the news that Derek Favors was defunct about a week before the season last year, didn't we?
Yeah. And so that could kill you. But I will say this, I do enjoy early drafts, just because if you're going to play it straight up and really go for the jugular, you're going to get the talented owner will do better because it's taken everybody else so long to catch up. They haven't caught up in early September as to who these sleepers are. So we haven't released our sleepers yet. We haven't released Brewski 150, B150 early release, which is available for Draft Guide subscribers at an additional cost. The projections as well will go out on 9/20. So there's plenty of stuff to keep you guys held over. And then on 10/1, the Brewski 150 will go out as is basically for free once you've bought the Draft Guide. That goes out on 10/1. So you just got to wait 10 days. The early is basically designed for those owners that have those early drafts. And again, we want to try to put a barrier in there. So if we put out our stuff on 9/20, real easy for other sites, to look at that and have it influence them. And sometimes it's not even really a kind of a bad thing. It's just, if you know somebody has good intel and you're gonna be in the business of making ranks or being a fantasy analyst, you might as well borrow from people that have done a ton of research, or at a minute, maybe you can fade me if you want. Either way, we're just trying to keep this out of everybody's hands as long as possible, so we can increase our odds of profit on these guys that we know are going to kill it. And that's the way we're going to approach it.
All right, so I have a strategic question about the draft for you that I'm going to ask myself, because this is something that I wrestle with on an annual basis. And that is, if I have a guy ranked, 50, doesn't matter, pick a number, any number, and he's going, in a lot of drafts, you see him going in like between 70 and 100, like a pretty big window, because a lot of times these guys where you feel like you have a stronger opinion on a player, a positive, strong opinion on a guy, they tend to bounce around a little bit, because you'll find leagues where maybe someone else also shares such an opinion. You might be in a league where no one shares such an opinion, and the guy might go anywhere from, like I said, 70 to 100. So a pretty big window. How do you know when to make your move on a guy like that? I struggle with that. And you've been in countless more leagues than I have, but I've done a lot of fantasy leagues, and I never know if I should jump on a guy like that at 70 to make sure I get him because I love his upside so much, or to wait a little bit longer and see if I could get him 80, 90 and try to maximize the value by being able to draft someone that is, more in demand in the 70 area. How do you balance that?
So just so I'm getting this straight, it's basically the ADP is 150, or is it 100?
Let's say 100 for now.
Yeah. Okay. So,
but you go in your draft anywhere from 70 to 100,
and I'm projecting, say, 75 or 50. Is it 75 or 50?
Let's say 50.
Okay, let's go 50, because this is the kind of scenario that you run up against all the time. ADP is so difficult to track, even if we've got the numbers. We'll get the numbers for each of the major sites, and they're going to change drastically between now and, say, October 1, when draft season really kicks off. You just got to know your personnel, your opponents. How do they think? What do they read? Are they Roto-World readers? I just went and did a football draft, and I show up every year for the last 3 years, not watching or reading a thing about football, just kind of basing everything off of my past experience being a fantasy football writer. but taking in the Roto World, which my guys Evan Silva and Pat and all those guys over there, they're great. They do great work, and I trust them implicitly with my drafts. I go over there and I slap my Roto World thing down on the table. I win almost, or not win. I lost last year, which sucked. But I'm in the playoffs every year, and I'm doing nothing to manage my team. And I slap this list down, and none of them care. They're like, they got their ESPN, they got their Yahoo list, and I'm just like, okay, you guys are never ever going to learn this trick to winning the league. You guys care a whole lot more, and if you had that, you'd just roll over everybody, no questions asked. If that's the kind of league you're in, then you wait. You take that ADP right down to within a round, and you try to get the profit margin, because you might end up locking up first place on draft day, which I've been able to do in leagues that are, say, beginner to intermediate. You knock down so many top 50. You're almost drafting all top 50 guys, and with the exception of a couple guys at the end of your roster that aren't in say, Brewski 150 talk, project to go in the top 50, and that's a lock. Like, you're not going to lose that league. I would be aggressive in that situation. Now, in an intermediate expert league, I think you really got to kind of just we'll put out a list actually really close to the end of draft season. It's called Players to Reach For, and you're going to go 2 rounds in advance of that ADP, just because you don't know if that ADP is right. Like, that ADP could be old. It could be driven by beginners. It could be driven by software glitches. It could be driven by anything. And all it takes is one person in your league to also know that this particular sleeper is, a great commodity. If you wait to get it to within 1 round, you could easily lose that player. I had that happen to me last year with Gorgie Jang all over the place. And he didn't have the greatest season, but he was very good. And I thought, this was a guy that by and large was getting undervalued in drafts. And I swear to you, every single 6th round, I think it was, that came along, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I can get Gorgie in the 7th. This seems doable. Didn't get him anywhere. And so you got to kind of, he's probably not the example of the player that I would say is kind of must get, that Otto Porter-esque.
Okay, but
from last year.
The point, I think, is what's more important there, not necessarily that Jang was drafted. I mean, he went at 39 in one of my leagues. I thought for sure I was going to be able to get him.
You mean last year?
From this most recent season. He went at 30.
That's a great example. I don't think anybody had him really that high, and I could probably confirm that for you here.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I thought I would be able to get him easily at that juncture, because I had the next pick. I had 40 and 41 on the front end of a 10-team league. And I thought, all right, well, Jang will come back to me. I'm going to do Jang and Ariza here. I'm going to shore up defensive stats and give myself some threes, low turnover guys. Easy enough. I'll reach a little bit. And he went at 39. Now, as we all know, he ended up whatever it was, 40-something, 50-something range, which is still good, but, didn't blow.
While getting benched.
Yes.
By Tibbs.
While basically losing the guy that was feeding him the ball as well in Zach LaVine. The only guy that bothered to pass to Gorgie Jang last year went down in January, I think, was it, right? That was fun for them. But he still had a pretty good year by all accounts. Quietly productive. I think he was around number 50. I can pull up the number while we're talking.
He was rated number 30 and 28 in the Brewski 150, and he finished at looks like 41 in 8 cat and 35 in 9 cat, and it was, to me, a disappointing season. Oh. And so his ADP, looking at these numbers, he was at 66 on 8 cat, and looks like his ADP jumped up to 55 in 9 cat. So,
and he was never there.
And I think the ADP numbers might have even been more slanted, because I kind of remember looking at that and saying, okay, that's outside of the 5th round, and I can get him in the 6th round perhaps. And I kind of think I thought I could get him in the 7th round. So I don't know if those ADP numbers, the ones I'm looking at, are at the end of draft season. And so obviously he was a big deal. I got him ranked 30. That's more or less where he finished. And that's a big value jump. Anybody that's in the top 30 to 40 is so much more valuable than the top 50 to 60. And I waited. and I thought I could outsmart the system, and I did not get him. So there you go.
Yeah, and so but how early could you possibly go on a guy like that? I mean, you
I should have got him in the 5th. Definitely should have got him in the 5th round, and that would have been, that's the risk and reward. And what you're trying to do as a kind of an expert drafter is you're trying to pack in as many players ahead of, that one play right there. And if I get him in the 7th round, which is what I believe it was, then I'm golden. You're getting a 7th round pick that's, anywhere from 73 to 84, and they're getting you top 30 value. That's, that's exactly what you're looking for. So reaching in a draft is one of the toughest things. It has a lot to do with where you are drafting in a snake draft. And that's why these auction drafts are so much more fun, in my opinion. You really get to compete with other owners on every single player. And there's so much more strategy that gets involved. But in a snake draft, if you're on the ends, now you're really having to reach, because you're not going to get a pick again for 23 slots.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I will, it's going to be backwards, I think, because it's on a webcam, but this was the diagram I made going into the offseason last year. How clear is that on your computer screen? Probably not that clear.
Clear as mud.
Yep. So not so great, but it's really, I mean, I have nice handwriting. So if that's not clear, then that's just as how it's going to be. But this was the list that I made going through the last 3 years and comparing guys' ADP to their final season marks to know how far off the ADP was, which I thought was kind of a nice ballpark figure, if nothing else, on when you can start reaching on guys, when it makes sense, and how far really to reach, where are you going too far? And then this most recent season, what we kind of determined was that, in the top 30 or so, outside of Derek Favors and Victor Oladipo, who they skewed the numbers wildly this last year, a couple of outliers there. Top 30 was pretty close. It was within about 5 to 10 slots of guys' final mark. Once you cleared the top 30, it jumped to about a round and a half, and when you cleared the top 50, it jumped to anywhere from 2 to 5 rounds off. So you're like, I mean, it's a ballpark thing, and it'll change on a year-to-year basis. But it does seem like once you get past that top 30, you have to be ready to make a move on a guy anywhere from 10 to 40 slots lower on the Yahoo or ESPN board than you think they're going to be. Basically, trust your numbers.
Got to trust your numbers. And you gotta hit, man. You gotta hit on a couple late rounders. You gotta hit on, your top 75 to 1. I know you've got that dividing line in your analysis that's pretty damn strong, in my opinion. Where
no man's land, my favorite land of all.
Right, where you're saying like the pre-ranks, if they're outside of that top 75, they have very little chance of getting up in there and making
right
a difference
on the diagram.
Is that in that chicken scratch? Got it.
That's from 61 to 70, the ADP last year, average miss was about 2 to 2.5 rounds. From 71 on, the average miss was closer to about 5 to 8 rounds. It was like this precipitous, insane drop off. And you could tweak it a tiny bit, because Brandon Knight blew up a 70-something mark, I believe, last year. So the 70 to 80 range without Brandon Knight missed by about 4 rounds, and then 81 to 150 missed by 5, 6, 5, 8, 7, 7, and 10 rounds every 10-pick chunk there. So there's nothing. There's almost no correlation of any kind last year once you got past 80.
You got to get your early round picks to hit, but you also got to get a couple guys. Ooh, news that just hit. Josh Richardson finalizing 4-year, $42 million contract extension with the Heat. Way to go, Josh.
Need a little
that's great stuff. Love that guy. Man, tell you what, Miami, we talked about this in previous podcasts. They just, if they could stay healthy last year, we would have just cleaned up. They did not stay healthy. And that's kind of a great thing to kind of segue into, because you're talking about the 75 to 150 range. My teams were loaded with guys that were available in the late rounds, like the Josh Richardsons, like the Justice Winslows, that if they had stayed moderately healthy in a projectable range, then they would climb up into those top 75 numbers. And that's what you're looking for in the late rounds. You're not looking for plotters that are just going to have top 150 value and kind of finish with that top 100 finish, or even worse sometimes. Top 175 guys you'll see kind of creep into these lists. You want guys that right now going into the season, they look like they're playing 22 minutes per game. And, you know, you look at somebody like the Heat and you go, okay, well, there's a big log jam there. You know, we're going to project Josh Richardson at 25 minutes per game or 26 minutes per game, whatever it's going to be. Tyler Johnson, same thing. We can't really say to ourselves, oh, somebody's going to get hurt. But if they do, you're going to have yourself a really good player with upside. So, you know, I guess draft strategy, you're always looking for upside in those late picks. And in the early rounds, there's something to be said for playing it a little bit safe. But at the end of the day, I don't know that there is such thing as a safe play. All these guys have the potential to get hurt, fall off, surge. And this year, there's probably, 8-9 guys in that early first round that really you can have a conversation about them being number one overall type picks. And that makes it fascinating. This year, especially with the schedule delay, or not delay, the schedule being bumped up, but the delay of news hitting, I don't think any of these basketball organizations have really kind of done anything to push forward media days, to push forward training camps. I think they're just going with a shortened preseason, and we're going to have a 3-week span of just condensed news from preseason, which is probably a good thing. I mean, there's so many puff pieces that get written because guys don't have anything to write about that, you know, it's a little bit, you know, the news is a little bit fluffy, but we're going to have this kind of unprecedented rush to evaluate all these guys. And when you have that first round looking so crazy, I mean, I got Russell Westbrook with the 8th pick, I think, the other day. And he was pursued as the number one overall pick last year. Now, of course, Paul George changes that to some degree, but how much is that really going to change things for Russ? I don't know. I mean, I can build an argument that Russ doesn't get changed at all by Paul George.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly ranted and raved sufficiently about, you know, does Paul George hurt him enough in the popcorn categories where it seems like, you know, efficiency numbers could actually see a slight uptick having someone nearby that's maybe a little more assertive than Victor Oladipo. But yeah, I mean, this is a conversation probably for another show. Aaron, this is me taking the wiffle ball and placing it softly atop the tee. So if somebody were to say, enjoy what you're talking about right now, draft strategy and where to reach for guys and maybe where not to, how perhaps could they become more involved in such a project at Hoob Ball? Yeah, I like that. Was that pretty good?
You deserve an Emmy for that. And also, you sold yourself short earlier in this show. If anybody wants, like, say you got a big commute, you drive to work every day, or you ride the subway or whatever you do, and you need to get it caught up in a big time way. Like you want to have high level analysis and in an audio form, you got to listen to every team specific podcast that this guy has done. Listening to them, you're going to get basically the audio version of our draft guide, which is what Dan is so lovely like pitching to me. And
I wasn't pitching me though, because my show's free.
Well, yeah, your show's free. You know, but it is among the other great shows in this industry that I just think that this info is, you know, prior to your show starting up, I always listen to Josh's show. Josh Lloyd does a great show, Red Rock Fantasy Basketball. And just so helpful to get that stream of thought from somebody that's got clear expert creds that, you know, can help you kind of see things or hear things, but then understand things differently about analysis. We get kind of tunnel vision when you're writing blurbs or writing articles or just, you know, doing your own analysis. and that audio component, it's just a little bit different. So I highly recommend you guys go check that out. But as far as the draft guide goes, this show that we're doing, we're going to do about 6 more shows, pardon me, like this, that will be for draft guide subscribers only, where you can ask the questions that you want to get asked. And then also closer to draft season. Because right now we are sitting here, there's been like one news item. This Richardson thing might be the second thing that came out today. It's very slow. So the market is still kind of in that pre-season mode. These other ones are going to be pretty important as far as really determining who's moving, who's shaking, what's this position battle here. There will be one key injury. There will be one key trade. What's going to happen with Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade? There's a lot of stuff that could happen to guys all across the draft board. So having these back and forth chats are really good for fantasy owners. We're also doing a lot of stuff in our forums. We'll be having stuff in our forums as far as the draft guide goes, but even without the draft guide right now, Eric Long has been running an early mock draft with a bunch of our readers. You go check that out in the forums. But yeah, as far as the draft guide goes, it is 350 pages of content currently. It is going to be probably, if I had to put an over-under on it, it'll finish right around like 420 pages.
Do you know the last time I read 400 pages of anything was probably high school? So the 90s?
You would love this because it's all extremely relevant. And this year we really took a lot of time to put extra time into the guide itself. We went 400 players deep on the player profiles. And when you do a player profile, the way we do it, we assess their entire injury history for their entire career. So that alone is worth the price of the guide. I haven't seen that anywhere on the internet. And, as far as assessing injury risk goes, you want to know what those long-term injuries are. The Isaiah Thomas hip thing, we've known about each time that he's hit the ground, more or less. And so you kind of have a little insight as to, okay, this hip thing might be a big deal. As far as other injuries, the list goes on. But these player profiles, they're not just limited to 10-team leagues or 12-team leagues. There's so many deep leagues. I just brought on a contributor the other day who's focused entirely on these 20 to 30-team leagues that seem to be proliferating. And I just think with like everything, fantasy expands and it grows. So these player profiles go all the way down to the rookies that were getting drafted in the second round. So there are a ton of profiles. If you want to get the exact information on any single player, you could just search them and you'll find it. As far as the other articles, there's so many different article types focusing on everything that we harp on here: money counting stat guys, pace reports, different, the obvious stuff, sleepers, busts, minute projections are already out. I put those out over the weekend. So there is enough content to kill you guys with. As far as the interactive side, though, we feel that being able to ask us questions in these sessions is a big deal. And, we're just carrying it over. We did this stuff all last year. We're going to keep doing it in the middle of the season. Part of this is a season pass product that will give you the best rate on getting both the draft guide and the in-season premium service, which works a lot like this, but continues to expand as we want to just offer you guys the most value. We want to be the most value. We want to give you the most content and do it at the cheapest cost. So right now, early bird specials, $13.99 on the draft guide. That's a really good rate. I know other draft guides out there like $19.99 or more. So yeah, we're going to do this. I can't wait. And it'll be with you, Dan. So we get to talk more often.
Yeah, all the time. Get used to the weird. It's back, baby. Follow Aaron on Twitter at Aaron Bruski. I'm at Dan Vespers on Twitter. At Hoopball Tweets, of course, is the website. I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned money counting stats, and I'm going to circle back to that. So don't let me forget on that topic. But we did get a question from Westender in the chat room. Auction draft strategy. I don't know the first bleeping thing. Amazingly, as many leagues as I've been in, I have never done an auction draft. And now I'm afraid because I'm old and terrified of technology and change. Luddite, I believe, is the term for that. And so this one's coming straight to you. I don't have a single opinion on it. I'm just going to read the question verbatim from the chat room. auction draft strategy. Do you have players that you will get at any cost, or do you sit and wait for bargains early on?
Man, I hope none of the guys in my league are watching. I mean, I this one Ringers league I play in has the best fantasy players in the United States or the world, bar none. They are so deadly. We do an auction draft. It's an 8-cat roto. And I mean, these guys use some of the most intriguing strategies. Some of them punt in roto leagues, which
in 8-cat,
especially in an 8-cat roto league, it's
that's
intense.
That is a razor thin margin there. You're giving away 12.
But I think they look at it as if they want to win this thing, they got to do something that's a little bit risky. So they go at it like that. I'm not a punter. I wrote the punt strategy article inside of the draft guide. 3,500 words on punting that I don't do. I mean, all the disclaimers aside, there's a reason punting works, and I'm not going to sit here and say you shouldn't do it, because I think you can. I think you can punt to win. It's just not my strategy. The punting strategy by these guys is great. Anyway, so as far as auction goes, it's a really wild affair. I don't think there's any secrets there. It's almost like chess, where if you're a chess master, you know what the other player's open is. If you go a certain direction, they almost kind of know what you're going to do. A lot of these guys, I'm sure, have my list printed up so they know how to bid me up, which sucks, but whatever.
That's a striking disadvantage to start at.
Man, I'll tell you, putting out your list and then having people use it against you is one of the worst feelings in the world. But we see people buy guys. I think the number one guy probably goes for about $120 out of 200 pretty consistently. Some years it might dip down to, like, say, 95 of 200. And you're seeing half of somebody's budget go in on a top 5 pick. I don't know that there is a limit. I think it really just comes down to what you're willing to part with. These top guys are worth so much. I mean, when you look at what a number 1 versus number 12 ranked player at the end of the year is worth, you can easily build the argument that they're worth, kind of as long as you're not doing like 150 of your 200, something in that 100 to 110, 120 range. You can build an argument for it because they're just so irreplaceable. And so you would just then have to be very strong with the rest of your draft. And that's something, in our auction draft strategy article, we talk about the different approaches, the strengths, the weaknesses.
Nice tying it back together there. I like that.
Yeah. You might actually, base it on kind of what you think you've seen in ADP. And if you think that you can get a bunch of $1 players that are top 75 guys, you might then be more inclined to go with that. It's kind of the stars and scrubs strategy. What I see mostly is people just hold their money. And you really have to look at that and ask yourself, what are these dollars worth at each stage in the draft? So, if you had $40 in the beginning of the draft, that's not much, but $40 at the end of the draft is actually quite a bit. So are you over saving? Is probably the thing I see the most. So check out the draft strategy article for the auction drafts. That's one that I crank out probably about October 1st-ish. And that's another thing with this guide is we try to keep fresh content in there and actually try not to write some of this stuff too early. Because if we write an article in, September, it's easily going to be out of date by the time we get to mid-October, early October. And it doesn't make sense to spend those resources writing that irrelevant article when we could crank it out now and get you something that's relevant. So a lot of stuff in there already, but we want to keep it updated for you as well.
I'm going to need you to go ahead and send me the article on auction draft strategy. Maybe I'll become less.
Are you going to get it an auction draft, Dan?
I can't
live in the now, man.
Can't add anything. I'm stuffed gill to gill over here. So let me talk about money counting stats and stat set issues. This was a mailbag question that I took on Monday's podcast, Fantasy NBA Today. And right when I opened up the question, I had a feeling that it was going to end up as the entire show, and it was. I ended up spending like 20 or 30 minutes just on the question, what does it mean for someone to have a stat set issue? And every time I started to answer the question, I sort of went a little farther into that rabbit hole. And it was like, okay, well, let's talk about Dennis Schroeder. And then suddenly it was, okay, let's talk about this guy. And then the list kept going. And I thought, all right, well, you could make an argument that almost every player in the NBA, besides Kawhi Leonard and Kevin Durant, have a stat set issue. But now you've actually overstretched the term. The point is, some guys, and then I want you to fill in the areas that I've sort of blanked out on. Some guys in the NBA appear, from a fantasy perspective, more valuable than they actually are because they are very shiny in the categories that people notice first. Basically, points in particular, rebounds, assists. Those are kind of the big three. Although nowadays, I think you could make the argument that like threes are becoming a little bit more noticeable than they were even 3 or 4 years ago. But points is the shiny one. And then people forget that because this guy is so good at scoring, that he's averaging 23 points a game and 2 rebounds and 3 assists, or even more than that, 3 rebounds and 4 assists, they're still not a good fantasy player because they get you 0.7 3-pointers, 0.8 steals, 0.2 blocks. They shoot 44% from the field and 77% of the foul line with 3 turnovers per game. And then you go, oh, wait a minute. This guy's only good in 3 out of my 9 categories. Isn't that basically the definition of a stat set issue? Is a guy that appears more valuable than they are because the stats they're good at are the shinier and more obvious ones?
Yeah. It could also take other forms. It could take the form of a lot of volume in a category that's not good for them, namely the percentages. Like you might not know that Elfrid Payton takes a lot of free throws. You might not feel it because it's not 8 free throws a game, and he's a guy that actually improved his foul shooting towards the end of last year, so he's not a great example, but that stuff weighs them down. I think Julius Randle was a guy where you didn't realize how much his free throw percentage was weighing him down. So typically it happens in either those 2 categories, but mostly it happens when I see this is the lack of steals and blocks. Those, because their numbers, they're integers from 1 to 2 for the most part. People see on a stat sheet, they'll see that somebody's either below 1, from 1 to 2, or above 2. And there's just, the variance is not really comprehended so easily. You have to look at it really in depth to figure out that these 2 categories are deficient. So you could get somebody that is going 24-4 every night, but because those other issues are there, they're really not that valuable. So yeah, stat set is something that, it's a term I coined about 4 or 5 years ago. And I felt like it was kind of high time for the industry, the fantasy universe, to turn around and stop overvaluing these popcorn stat guys. And I'm glad that we've been able to kind of bring that to the forefront, along with other great tools like Basketball Monster and other great sites out there that have really been able to put it out in front of you. It's not enough to just score 20 points, Swaggy P style. Another great thing you mentioned with the threes is, the league changes. The proliferation of threes has made 3-point shooting kind of just a unique thing. There's more threes that are available. Big men are shooting threes. It's taken everybody forever to figure out that big men shooting threes is not necessarily a good thing. They got to make them at a very high clip to make it worthwhile. It has an impact on their offensive rebounding. There's things that don't work about it. But one tool that we've developed for Android users is that RotoBalance app, and it's just a phenomenal idea, brought to us by our buddy George, who's working on our apps now. And more or less what it does is it takes all of these leagues across the internet, and it has measured how many in each category somebody needed to win that category. And so it's really measured kind of the reality of what's going on out there in fantasy leagues. And so if you're drafting with this app, which is free for all Draft Guide subscribers, you can enter your players in as you're drafting, and it's really simple. We made this thing as simple as you can get it, to where there's no bells or whistles, really. It's just balancing your team for you so you can see, are you overly stocked or understocked in any given category, so you don't So you're not inefficient with your drafting. I highly recommend, if you've already bought the draft guide, just go to that page, look at it, find an Android device. I'm not an Android guy, I'm an Apple guy. They just take my money every year. So I actually found an Android device just so I can lay this down next to my computer while I draft. So I have a check on what I'm seeing in other places. And the other thing is it uses the Brewski 150 projections. So, you guys know you'll have the best projections out there.
I wish I had an Android device. I desperately
Go find one.
Are we gonna have this bad boy for Apple devices by 2018? I hope so.
I'm told yes. We'll see. As with everything over here, we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Our group has grown to over 50 deep, and we have all these different things that are going on. And I would think, yes, Apple would be a big priority for us. But we're also working on an app for the site. So I don't know. We'll see.
Holy moly. The list goes on. Hey, would you argue nowadays that money counting stats could involve, I'm almost in the camp that we need to replace 3-pointers with field goal percent. I feel like people have forgotten about field goal percent. Am I crazy?
Well, that's the big head-to-head discussion. Like, people treat field goal percentage and free throw percentage as these categories that they can just kick. They're just like, it doesn't matter because if I punt this, I might win it one week anyway.
Right.
Just because of whatever random dumb luck. If your bad field goal percent or free throw percentage guy plays twice and everybody else that's good plays 4 times, you might actually come away with the win in these various punt builds. But they're all measured in the same type of way. So your auto porters that don't have big popcorn numbers but come in and bring you top 30 value, in these head-to-head rankings, they say, oh, he's not a good head-to-head guy. Well, he's also providing X value for you in those percentages categories, and that in turn can win you a category. So when you normalize across categories, that's why I'm not a big punter, or I don't like to slide my head-to-head ranks so much as other guys. They'll take the guys that specialize in money counting stats and drop them down because their points are low, the integer counting stats are low, and it's just, I think we've learned more about the way that all this gets measured is it's not, there's no reason necessarily to downgrade those guys.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna plug another website you did already.
Field goal percentage? Yeah, I think field goal percentage is important. Like, that's actually one of the punt strategies that these guys in these ringer leagues that they do, that when I look at it, it's dangerous. 2 years ago when I won, the guy that I was beating had 12s across all of the different categories, and he punted field goal percentages. So he had the 1 there. And if I didn't have such a stacked team, I was looking at that team like it was unbeatable because it was stacked with guys that were productive in every category other than that. And to the point of field goal percentage being a money counting stat, I think in order to win a Roto league, you have to address percentages fairly strongly.
Yeah.
And then find your other value elsewhere. When you start getting down in those categories, it's so hard to make up because of the volume. Once your percentage gets weighted over the course of 75% of the season, you're not going to fly up that list. And so, yeah, that's that's a little bit of a bummer.
So, follow-up question coming from the chat room, actually, on this discussion. Can a guy with a stat set issue still help your team? I would say probably, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is the balancing part of this is, especially in Roto leagues, as you get towards the end of the year, you start taking these measurements as to what can I do in a category to start getting more points. And so a player that can help you in these categories that you can accumulate more points now carries more value for your particular squad than he would if he can't help you in those regards. So somebody like Elfrid Payton would be, if say free throw percentage doesn't matter to you and 3-point shooting doesn't matter to you, and you're looking at everything else he does, that would be a great player for you to pick up. And I'll say this, I think Payton has evolved a little bit from a guy that, in previous years we'd say, hey, you know what, don't touch him. He's got stat set issues. He's not going to be able to exceed late round value, even if he has a great season. You know, he's actually improved in enough areas to where that's going to be a, you know, he's not going to have quite that designation anymore. So you just got to find out for your particular team build what's going to work for you.
And that's why it's tough to end up with a guy like that on draft night, right? Because you're still trying to get a feel for where you are weak and where you are strong, or is there still a reason to look at him even then?
We looked at the punting strategies really closely, and so they kind of illustrate some issues where your first couple picks might really drive a lot of the discussion. Like you got, say you draft Damian Lillard and your steals and blocks are really low to start off. And the elite steals and blocks guys, they're coming off the board pretty quick. You might, after a couple, 3-4 rounds, decide these are categories I don't want to be competitive in. I want to load up in the other 7 categories in a head-to-head league and really get after it in those categories. So you just have to be flexible. You have to take, again, an app like RotoBalance is a great tool to have. And there's other tools that are out there as well that are great. And decide, are you abandoning balance and going for condensed value in a given category? I'm a balance guy. I would, if I draft Damian Lillard, I'm going to make sure I have a focus on steals and blocks, with my next couple picks. And that's the beautiful thing about this game. As a reader wrote into me, or actually I think he posted in the forums, this is, there's so many different ways you can craft your team. And you might look and see a lot of value accumulating in a couple different categories. And when I say accumulated, I mean drafted, and see that the entire league is zigging one way. And if you zag the other way, you can get all of those different assets at a lower cost. It's kind of like the way that the NBA worked this offseason, where a couple key positions at point guard and big man, there were more players than there were jobs. So somebody like Nerlens Noel, who should have got a lot more than he got, there was nowhere for him to go. Nobody needed a big man that they wanted to pay a big dollar amount to. So he sat there until Mark Cuban lowballed him. Same thing with some of these other point guards. So you can see where the scarcity is in your league, and really try to, in fantasy football, you see 8 people take a running back. You don't want to take the 9th running back. You want to start the next run. You want to get the wide receiver or whatever other position you're going for. So that's the beauty of this game, is there's no exact way to win it, and you just need to be mobile when you're doing your decision making in order to take advantage of trends.
Question on Victor Oladipo. That's a nice one. I like that. That gets us rolling here into player names. Basically, who is this guy? I think is the condensed version of that question. Is he the Victor Oladipo that we saw flashes of even when Scott Skiles was yanking him around a couple of years ago? Is he this weird iteration of Oladipo who was wildly out of place in Oklahoma City and just couldn't find his footing? And where are areas of improvement? I'll throw a few numbers out that Oladipo posted this most recent season. 15.9 points per game, about 2 3-pointers, a little over 4 rebounds, 2.5 assists, just over 1 steal per game, 44% from the field, and 75% from the free throw line. A lot of areas that I think were surprising, given his career numbers. Expectation would have been a higher steal count, probably a better free throw number, probably superior scoring, given the fact that he was one of really only 2 guys on that team who could score the basketball. The hope, I think, was probably for more assists, but they all ended up in Russell Westbrook's hands. So, to the question of what are the areas of improvement for Victor moving to Indiana, scoring, rebounding, assists, steals, blocks, free throw percentage. Honestly, one of the only areas that I don't think changes a whole lot is field goal percentage. I mean, that's like he was around his career mark there, despite all of this stuff. And health. Health is an area for improvement. He missed 15 games this year, and he wasn't right in another 10 to 15 that he was playing. So I see a lot of areas where Victor Oladipo could improve, and I feel like the world is aware of it. I don't know that I'm, we talked about him right when he got moved as a potential value. And I feel like, we're still early on in draft season, and I don't know that the value is even there anymore. I feel like the market kind of caught up with that quickly.
Yeah, I don't think everybody's willing to let go of the dream. Like, it was such a brutal blow. I mean, I don't think I had Oladipo anywhere, but I wasn't like, off on an island screaming, "Don't draft Victor Oladipo." Last year, he did not mix with Russell Westbrook, and Russell is going to have to really, this year will be the probably litmus test as far as whether or not he can coexist with other players. And I'm a Russell Westbrook guy. This isn't that discussion. This is just purely, he's this Ferrari that has to figure out how to be an economy model, and at times and get other guys involved, even when it's not the best play. He can get his shot. He can be the best play every single time. And there's an argument to be made. You go with your best. You go with your A person. You don't go with your B person. But in the case of these other players, they're now becoming C players and not B players because they're standing around watching. So maybe you do go with your B guy instead of your A guy, just to kind of keep everything copacetic. Now, what we saw with Oladipo in OKC was he turned into more of a spot up shooter, and that was to be expected. His 3-point attempts jumped. I think we'll see that regress back to normal. I think you'll see him on the ball a lot more. His free throw attempts went way down. His assists went way down. His steals went way down. And this is a very common phenomena, is guys that aren't involved in offense, they will see their defensive numbers dip. And some of that, you can question whether or not, you would watch Oladipo play and he was hesitant. It wasn't the same guy. And there was times when he just clearly didn't have it. The scoring numbers didn't dip that much, but the confidence he had with the ball, you could see he had a down year. So what's that going to look like in Indy? Is he going to take charge right away? I think that's what people in the ADP is saying, is people look at that roster and they go, okay, he's the best player, or one of the best players are, not counting Miles Turner, of course. He'll be the guy that they kind of coalesce around. And we'll see that sort of Orlando Oladipo, or this kind of idealized Oladipo going forward. I'm pretty, I'm pretty optimistic about what he's going to be able to do there. I don't know that there will be margin for fantasy owners. We'll have to see how that goes, but I do think there will be a shifting of his statistics, and that's going to be very important. And you just got to kind of wonder, are things like pace, are they going to come into play? How much is he going to get pulled back if he doesn't meet expectations? So he's a fascinating draft target. I'll say that. Really looking forward to see what that ADP is.
Yeah, another guy who's ADP pretty interested in, and I've seen his name pop up a lot lately. We just got a question about him, and I know we're gonna have to toe tap this one just a little bit. So warning everybody, I'm not gonna ask Brewski for his actual ranking of this player, but we cruise to roughly 5,600 feet above sea level and the point guard position for the Denver Nuggets. I had Harrison Wind on the podcast, and he was very bullish on Jamal Murray as a guy that's going to have the ball and do a lot. I love everybody in Denver, but I've talked about that on the podcast ad nauseum. How high are the two of us on Jamal Murray is the question. And again, we have to do this sort of gently. I'll offer my thoughts, since I'm not putting out a Bespris 150 and nobody would want it even if I did. I am fairly high on Jamal Murray, but I think that I am less enthusiastic about him than some of the other voices across the fantasy industry. I know that there's a certain threshold there. There's a, he can do a lot of things, and we saw him go crazy for about 3 weeks at the end of the year last year. But if this Denver team is truly healthy, then he's not going to be, he's probably third, fourth, maybe even fifth in the pecking order, which to me makes it tough to hit that point that a lot of people are expecting. But I mean, if he's playing minutes for this team, and the ball movement is what we saw with guys like Jokic and now Millsap, who's a good passer, and Gary Harris, who's just a terrific efficiency shooting guard. You guys know that I like Gary Harris a lot. I've talked about him on the pod many times. Where do you sit just from like an overall impression of a guy like Jamal Murray, and not getting into the ranking stuff?
I mean, he is he's gone early in drafts, man. I've seen him go 65, I want to say, in one mock I'm currently doing. And I don't see how he gets there. I'll put it to you that way. I see him high on a lot of lists, and high on some lists that I've seen that are containing other players that are, 40, 50 slots out of, really easy projections that shouldn't really be messed up. And I think that's going to really push his ADP up. But I don't think that there's, I think the guys that are high on him in the industry, I don't know off the top of my head. The guys I'm in with the mock draft that I'm in with Basketball Monster, all those guys know their stuff. I think that they're, completely locked in. So if they're taking a chance on Murray, it's based on their own solid intel. There's a couple lists I've seen out there though, where he is high, but then some of these other rankings, whoever made them must have been high. They're like, there's guys that are like
bad way or a good way on that one. Like because we've seen
high on some, they're high in a bad way. They're basically, you can't make an argument for certain picks on their list. So I just think that there'll be an ADP push. That's what I'm trying to say. There's an ADP push on Jamal Murray that I don't think is sustainable. And this gets back to the stat set. You look at it last year's stats, and he had 0.6 steals, 0.3 blocks per game in 21 minutes. So what are we going to say? He's going to get 30 minutes? Okay, I'm good with that. What's he going to combine in the steals and blocks department? Like, 1.5? That's not getting it done. He was a 40% shooter last year. So let's say he improves to 42, 43. It's hard to see him taking on more volume and suddenly jumping up to 45, 46% from the field. He's probably going to be a 40 to 44% shooter for at least the next couple of years. Maybe if you want to say 42 to 44, I'm good with that. That's before you get to the other obvious questions, which is how much is he really going to get the ball in positions to do fantasy damage? He's going to be a great player and he's going to have a big time role, but what is he going to be doing to get assists, rebounds, get to the foul line? He as a cutter, is pretty good, I guess, for we don't know a lot about his overall cutting ability, I would say. But Gary Harris is good. How many cuts is he going to get to where he can get high percentage shots, that are not 3-pointers? So I just have a big time question about his stat set. I love the player. I think that with Paul Millsap there, you have two amazing pieces that you can use, kind of like rooks on a chessboard, where these two guys are going to pick apart opposing defenses. Why would you go to Jamal Murray and sort of neutralize those two players when what Jamal's great at is slashing, cutting, dribbling, all the guard skills that you would like. But, yeah, you can pick and pop with both of those guys, but really kind of why take the ball out of Jokic's hands? Why take the ball out of Millsap's hands? I just don't see it. I might be in the minority on that. I don't know, but he won't be a big time Brewski 150 guy.
No, it seems like you and I actually see eye to eye on that one, in that it does seem like there's something to this guy, but if he's going as early as we're seeing him go, and as we're seeing him in some of these lists, he's
going as a blue chip young guy.
But how do you exceed that mark? Isn't that the point of draft picks? Let's ignore like the first 3 rounds. And let's say that the point of the first 3 rounds is to get guys that finish in the first 3 rounds. Don't you bleep this up, would be the advice that I would give someone. Obviously it'd be nice if you drafted somebody at 30 and they ended up at 18. But at the end of the day, your first 3 rounds should be top 3 round guys at the end of the year. And then you're in good shape. If you don't screw those up, you're in fine shape going forward. But as you move towards 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those rounds, isn't the point really to draft somebody that can exceed where you draft them by anywhere from 1 to 3 rounds? And if you draft somebody super early, how can they exceed that mark?
They can't. That's the problem with this big kind of ADP push. If you put your stuff out there too early, it's like Rudy Gobert, you know, if the year he was ranked high, you know, and
I had him. I had him. I bid on that one.
Oh, we all did. We all did. And what happens is they get pushed so far up draft boards that the best case scenario is you push. And it's a tough place to be because on one hand, if you have somebody ranked at 12, let's just use 12 as an example, and you think that they're the number 12 player, you almost kind of got to go with it because what are you going to do at 12? Are you going to draft somebody that you have lower? Exactly. It's not like you can trade out of the position very easily in most leagues to be like, okay, I'll take the lower guy just because there's a better potential profit margin. So you're kind of stuck in that position and you really got to think it through. But it's one of the reasons that for our loyal readers, we do not want to kind of ruin the marketplace by getting all hot and bothered over the, you know, kind of that obvious, you know, upside or the obvious, you know, shiny new toy that's going to be out there. You know, we'll wait. Let's let the dust settle. Let's let the market set itself. And then we come in and we just wallop it.
All right. That's basically what I wanted to ask on that front. We've, believe it or not, been on air for over an hour already. This time flies, my man, when you're picking apart draft day. This is, by the way, those that did have a chance to tune in at some point, this is basically what the next month is going to be like on Fantasy NBA Today, just discussing draft strategy, recapping our slow mock we got going at Hoop Ball right now. Big ups to Eric Ong, Fantasy Hoopla, the Filipino, man, I really should have come up with an alliteration before I started that, right? Man, that
Filipino Fireball.
The Filipino Fireball, Eric Ong hosting the slow mock. Rounds 4 through 6 are happening tonight. You can see the results of rounds 1 through 3. I'm excited, Brew. You mentioned the sort of new look forums at Hoop Ball. I think this is something that could become a really nice tool for fantasy players, kind of helping one another as long as presumably they're not in the same league.
Yeah, no, I think that everybody should get into those forums and really just, you know, blow them up, because one of the things that you guys can do is start to kind of crowdsource your knowledge and really get in there and have intelligent conversations. One thing I've always been blessed with is intelligent followers. I look at some of my colleagues at these places, the big websites, you know, kind of like the Yahoos and the CBS of the world, and I see them replying to their followers, and I'm like, man, you got some dumb followers. Like, how do you deal with this on a day-to-day basis? But fantasy owners are much smarter about this stuff. And I've always said that if you took the top 100 fantasy owners, they would easily have better knowledge than most of the internet on a lot of this different stuff. But yeah, get in there, use it to your advantage. You start topics on individual players, start topics on start, sit, trade, you name it. I mean, we are just one opinion. And you know, we do this quite a bit. You know, I'd like to think our opinion is a lot better than others out there. But the fact of the matter is you should collect as many opinions as you can, because frankly, there's only 24 hours in a day. And there's no way I can get to everything. I mean, I do my best to get to everything and I make it a priority to get to everything, but there is stuff I miss. So I read other people and I get other ideas. I listen to your show, Dan. I do a lot of different things to stay on top of the game. But I would definitely file for an extra 24 hours in every day, so I could then have the, you know, the appropriate amount of knowledge to say I'm complete. I got the whole thing figured out, but I can't. So get in there, guys. Read that. Start your own topics, and I'll get in there and I'll join you guys.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And I actually did a show on Fantasy NBA Today on how to read multiple sources and not lose your mind. That was a Labor Day special because I figured nobody'd be listening. So the show was basically, you know, how do you aggregate the good opinions and the bad opinions and make sure that the good stuff gets into your head and you're able to keep the bad stuff out. That was a hard show.
When I was at Roto World, the guys in the football department, they kind of had a motto, was no garbage in. Like literally they didn't read anybody else.
I think it's a motto. You kind of have to pick one or two sources that you truly trust and go with them, because if you read everybody, then you're going to love and hate every player in the NBA, and you're going to go into panic mode on draft day.
It's really hard. I mean, because in this probably be the wrap it up comment is that we do this with the beat writers. Like some of the beat writers have a great eye for basketball. Some of them don't know basketball, you know, at all. And it's really you got to figure out who you can trust, because if I'm going to be covering 14 games in a night and trying to actually know what happened, you would actually, not be able to do it. And you have to rely on outside voices to tell you, hey, this guy's a really good defender. Well, okay. Are you just saying that because you want the team to give you access, or are you saying that because you watch film and you understand that he's a good defender? So those types of things are a big deal, and trying to figure out who knows what is a big deal. I do try to limit my the opinions that I get, because it's a little tough. There's a lot out there. So figure out who you want to hitch your wagon to.
Opinions are like, can I say this? I don't know. It's not clean. Opinions are like, I guess we can say buttholes instead of the swear word. Everybody's got one. I kept it clean enough. Let's wrap her up. Aaron, give me the price tags on those things one more time and tell everybody where they can find them.
$13.99 is the current early bird special that will be going up on the 20th. So definitely, if you want to try to get this all cheap, best way to do it is a season pass. You get not only the draft guide, but you get the in-season product, which is expanding, and it's just great. And I love what's going on with that. But if you're going just for the draft guide, $13.99, it will continue to rise as we get to draft season. Go to Hoopball, hoop-ball.com. There's a tab for draft guide. There's a link that says buy the draft guide, and you get details there. That's pretty much where you go. That's
Tell
how
your
you
friends.
do it.
Tell your friends, at least those that are not in your league. Because I can't, in good conscience, tell you to tell the other people in your same league to get the same advantage you have.
No, you got to hold the advantage as long as you can. It's not good for us, but it's good for you.
That's right. We want you guys to win, because let's face it, if you win, you'll probably come back. If you're in a league where all 10, 12 teams have the same information, none of you is coming back. Because you're all
no, you come back because you have to. You're just not winning anymore.
All right, that's the perfect way to end it. Come on back, win or lose. He's Aaron Bruski. I'm Dan Vespris. This was Draft Prep Q&A session 1. We'll have another one next week, and I think you said like 6 or 7 more of these leading up to NBA opening night. And then we'll get into Fantasy NBA tonight. We'll have the nightly casts. We'll have some daily casts. We'll have some weekly waiver shows. We'll have some Monday lineup shows for premium subscribers. And, of course, Fantasy NBA Today rumbles on. If you want today's show, that is the recap, rounds 1 through 3 on the Eric On Slow Mock Draft. Over in the Hoopball forum, hoop-ball.com. Click on forums and participate in that as well. Have a lovely Wednesday, everybody. Toodaloo.